Hi and welcome to another HanDrinksSolo wine info video. Today we're going to be discussing Elgin Vintners Merlot 2019. Now Elgin Vintners released their first vintage in 2011, so they're a pretty young producer even by Elgin standards. But their winemaker Dr. Marinda Kruger Classen very quickly established the brand's reputation for having a quality over quantity ethos. I think what illustrates this best is perhaps when they released their Cloud Haven range, journalists were talking about the wine as an entry-level bottling. And she very quickly corrected them and said, Elgin Vintners does not make entry-level wines, although some wines just cost less than others. Now, she may have been protesting a little much at the time, but I think if you get to drink the Cloud Haven range, you'll very quickly see what she's talking about. There's nothing entry-level about them. But back to the more reserved Elgin Merlot 2019. Now, Elgin Vintners would hardly describe Merlot as a central focal point for their business strategy, but that doesn't change the fact that this is a stonking good wine. In fact, I have a sneaking suspicion that we are going to begin to hear a lot more about Elgin Merlot as a thing in the coming vintages, but we'll have to talk more about that on another day. Right now, it's time to figure out what's in the glass. For me, this is just such a textbook Merlot aroma. In fact, it's got such clarity on the nose that you can tease out all the various components. And as I've said before, you can then figure out how the wine was made. It's kind of like an episode of Scooby-Doo, like a detective show for dummies, right? Because you really did have to be very special to not be able to figure out that the evil villainous ghoul that was terrorizing the museum ended up being none other than the kind old Grandpa Saunders. And he would have got away with it too if it weren't for those pesky kids. Like the identity of Grandpa Saunders, we can figure out how this wine was made just by sniffing it. Now, we've spoken a little bit about primary and secondary and tertiary aromas and what they all mean, but we're going to take a level down and get a little more complex, because even amongst primary aromas, you can have subcategories, right? And Merlot is one of those grapes that definitely has more than one category, because you can smell here a little bit of black cherry, even some red cherry and raspberry, also some plum. But on the vanguard, there's a whole second category of aromas which are far more herbal, some kind of thyme and some oregano, maybe even a little hint of eucalyptus. And in some other Merlots, when that herbal element really opens up, it can flip over into floral, almost like a lavender type zone. But this is all from the grape itself. So technically still primary, but not just fruit. So it's always worth remembering that primary aromas can have both fruit components and herbal components and a whole bunch of others. As we keep sniffing this wine, there definitely is something secondary going on. There's a kind of cocoa dust, which I think some people also might recognize as chocolate. And then there is also this cedar wood. Now, not all of us have had the privilege of growing up and living in a lumber mill, but if that is not it and you have no idea what cedar wood smells like, perhaps just go and open your nana's antique crockery cabinet and stick your head in there for a minute or two. You'll have some idea of what cedar wood smells like. And that's all secondary, right? Because that is all oak derived. So what else can we tell? Well, did you notice that the fruit components, especially the darker fruit, like the plum elements that pop through, seem to almost present as a kind of roasted plum or a baked plum pudding? This is a case of secondary elements like vanilla and like caramel and chocolate from oak interacting with your primary elements that come from the grape, your plum elements, and combining to create something new. In a really great wine, it should be fully integrated. And we use this word all the time, stuff that wine folks say. But really, integration is where the components don't feel separate and don't stand apart, but in fact meld. And I think this aroma of kind of plum pudding is a case of the plum fruit and the oak elements combining to create something better than just simply the sum of its parts. So if you connected with the aromas that I was mentioning just now, then you probably would have correctly deduced that this is a barrel matured wine. This Merlot sits in French oak for 20 months, but it's also fermented in open top wooden fermenters. You might say, enough about the wine, Han. Tell me about the incredible person who made this beautifully integrated Merlot. Well, the answer, as I've said earlier, is Dr. Marinda Kruger Classen. She started her career getting a BSc in food science and ended up more recently getting her doctorate. She did her thesis on natural white wine fermentation with a focus on fermentation trajectories and sensory outcomes. So if you think you love her red wines, I would suggest that you track down some of her white wines as well, not least of all the Century White Blend. Marinda only joined Elgin Vintners in 2018, so she's been there 4 short years, but she really has taken the label from relative obscurity to being one of Elgin's stalwarts. And even though they only produce about 125,000 bottles, which makes them fairly tiny, their reputation goes far beyond the small quantities that they produce. Okay, so to sum up everything we've spoken about today, I'd like to say that this particular little Merlot, in all its glory, is a symptom of things to come. It is a super tight, muscly, structured, beautiful expression of Elgin Merlot, and it is, I think, a little signpost pointing to a time in the not too distant future where Elgin Merlot is going to be a thing. And if you don't believe me or you're skeptical, why not track down a few Elgin Merlots and taste them for yourself? Not least of all, the Shannon Mount Bullitt Merlot and the Elgin Reserve Merlot. Finally, if you're watching this on the HanDrinksSolo website, why not leave your own thoughts in the review section below this video? It makes it so much richer for other members of the community to hear thoughts more than just my own. And if you have any questions, I'll try and answer those and get them back to you as soon as possible.